So welcome everyone. My name is Konstantin Savenkov. I'm CEO and co-founder of Intento, and I will be moderating today's discussion on bad data brought to us by Argus Multilingual. So I'm joined today by three other industry experts: Wojciech Froelich, VP of Solution Engineering at language service provider Argus Multilingual; Dominick, Sales and Technology Director of machine translation provider KantanMT; and Relf, Director of Data Science and Business Analytics at data-driven consulting group VIQTOR, UK.
Hello, everybody.
Good. So before we get into the questions, I'd like to explain why we thought it would be a good idea to bring up this bad topic. So data has become the key to driving successful businesses, and there's lots of controversy around evaluating the quality of data and whether bad data is a necessity in our society or not, as well as different perceptions of what really is considered bad. So in terms of what types of data we'll be discussing, mostly we'll speak about source data, original data, which we generate and have and make decisions based on, but also we'll touch on the data used for training artificial intelligence. So without further delay, I'd like to ask the first question to each of our panelists. I know that you all were intrigued by this topic, but let's make sure we understand it, how we understand it. So in a short sentence, what's your definition of bad data? Dominick?
Yeah, so bad data. Well, as you mentioned, it's kind of driving the world around. The data is there. But for me, bad data that no longer has a purpose or value to its owner. That would be what I would say. If you had to sum it up as a short, sharp sentence, that's what I would say it is. Data that no longer has a value, basically, or a purpose to its owner.
Good, thanks. William, what's your take?
I think in the real world, the data we capture and process will never be perfect, but I don't think it needs to be, but it does need to be good enough. So I think bad data then is relative, and I define it as data that doesn't meet those thresholds for good enough, whatever that may be. And that in turn prevents data being used or intended to reach some kind of outcome, which I think, is the point that Dominick there was making.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would like to continue what William just said, that, bad data is whatever is not correct, and what is correct, and especially, from the language service provider perspective, that's probably gonna be, either bilingual data or multilingual data. Whatever is not correct is a bad data, and what is correct, this is up to be defined. This is what we define in some checks, defined through some quality assurance process. So whatever fails the checks that we define is a bad data.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I think we already got at least two different angles here. Data is bad when it doesn't have value, and data is bad when it's incorrect, because it might happen that incorrect data has some value, right? But before we get there to discuss that, let's start from, so with these definitions of bad data, so what do you think makes data turn bad, or maybe even whose fault is that? What do you think?
So if it's okay if I answer this question, because I've been itching to answer this question, right? I've been itching to answer this question. I wrote a few bits and pieces internally about data management, and I always like to bring it down to a level that if you're not a data scientist, you can understand it, right? Because I live in Donegal, northwest of Ireland. There's not many data scientists around here, okay? So if I try to explain to them what bad data is and how it gets bad, they wouldn't really get the science facts of it. But so what I say is, it's data, in my mind, it starts off as a neutral thing, right? So it doesn't, when you start building data, it's too small, it doesn't have value, but it gains value the more you build it. So it's kind of like a puppy. It's small when you get it, right? And as that creature, animal evolves, it gets more value. So you might say, you know, like your life was fine before you had data in it, but now you have data in it, you have to invest time and effort for it to be healthy and get good. But bad data then happens that over the course of a period of time. So where you, for example, there's lots of people in your house and they all treat the animal differently, it picks up bad habits. Someone feeds it chocolate, someone doesn't clean up after it. And eventually it's like a communal amount of things that happen. And all of a sudden your dog now starts to not work the way it should do, or start to be, let's say, unpredictable. And that's my kind of mind of how data becomes bad. It's not necessarily one thing. And it's not the dog necessarily isn't bad. It's probably just, you know, let's say accumulation of things that now it reacts like it's meant to react. So that's what I would say is, you know, how data ends up getting bad. It's, you know, it's the amount of touch points and processes that get involved in it. And then eventually at the end, you get something which isn't what you put in the beginning often.
I think what I'd like to do is, I think what you said there, Dominic, you know, the things that happen over time, the feeding that puppy chocolate and things like that, what does that look like? And I think that, you know, working with the clients that we do through VIQTOR Davis, the key sort of factors which tend to come up, which translate into that chocolate that you're talking about feeding a puppy. And I think categorized generally, you've got technical issues. There are bugs, broken processes, liberal data entry validation, maybe around data entry forms, etc. Stagnating legacy systems, things like that. There's those technical issues which cause data to start to drift away from what that definition of good data would be, which, as I've said, is a relative term. And those things are slightly easier to sort out. But then the more difficult things are the inevitable environmental factors of business, acquisition, merging of organizations, two companies coming together, source systems being merged together, etc. And we see that quite often where data has been merged from one system to another. And you know, not necessarily that mistakes happen, but there are different levels of quality in those different systems that you bring together. And I think overarching those two is a general lack of ownership. So there's no one individual who takes responsibility for insisting that technical issues are resolved, for defining process for remedial action, etc., or assigning roles of responsibility to try and eliminate those data quality issues and ensure that data quality standards maintained. I suppose in your analogy, Dom, that would be like the trainer, the puppy trainer, who's actually you know, in charge in that household of making sure that puppy's been raised properly into a well-behaved, well-disciplined adult. So I think, you know, the second part of that question, which, you know, who is at fault? I think that, you know, really the fault lies with the individuals who own the systems, the processes where that data is originally captured and generated back up at source. And the data, I think, is often described as an organizational asset in the same way that a dog is a household, it's a family dog. Everyone owns the dog.
Yeah.
But really, I think quality of data or the discipline of that dog is the concern of just a few individuals. And the way I think of it is, you know, much like, you know, money is a financial asset, it belongs to the organization, but it's the accountants who are charged with looking after it and ensuring that it's accounted for, and there are proper practices around it and things like that. So there's always a few individuals that are accountable, and it's normally those individuals that look after those source systems.
You hope.
Yeah. That's something to establish. That's something that we definitely help organizations establish. That is quite a challenge.
Yeah. Just to continue that puppy, you know, I just want to give you some, you know, anecdotal data. You know, there is one of the GPS systems, you know, just started suggesting, you know, users, you know, left turn when it's not, you know, possible, when it's just, you know, illegal. And it turns out that it was just users who were just breaking law at that, you know, junction, you know, and doing left turn, that, you know, just caused, you know, this specific, you know, GPS application to suggest that, okay, you can do left turn here. You can just go here. And it was because the users were just not doing it right. And it was so much data, you know, that the application, you know, just said, yeah, okay, everybody's doing that, you know, so I'm just suggesting it. So that was that puppy that was not, you know, properly trained, you know, and everybody was allowing the puppy to do something bad, and, you know, and then it just became normal. But, you know, about the quality, okay, yeah, go on, Dominic.
I was just gonna say it's funny, you know, if we take the analogy of the puppy again, like, so let's say, for example, you train a dog, it's well trained, it's well disciplined for a particular purpose. Let's say it's a firefighter's dog, right? Or let's say it's a police dog. So its job is to go around sniffing and looking for things, right? And when it sees things, it reacts. Okay. Now, if that dog no longer has a purpose, and it's no longer a fire dog, and it's retired for whatever reason, and now a young girl has it, and now it's running around sniffing and pulling her in different places that it shouldn't send her, or a young boy or a young or whatever kind of family member, it's now dragging him around. He's acting exactly as he's been programmed. He's not changing his behavior. He's doing exactly as he's been programmed, and that is what I say. You know, does he have a value? Does he have a purpose? Like, the dog had a purpose, so therefore it was good. But the same dog in a different hand, in other words, a different owner, is no longer valid, no longer has a value, and no longer has a purpose, and then it can just go off and do things. It's the analogy I use is kind of based around machine translation, so that's why I kind of take, you know, you feed an engine one thing and then you expect to do something.
Yeah, but
different.
You know, when it comes to language, you know, let's leave that dog analogy for a moment. You know, and the language, language is a living thing, and that makes things much more complicated when we start talking about the language data. Because this is we've seen that with our clients several times, that, you know, the language changes, you know, and even over let's say course of, you know, 10 years, 15 years, you know, the language used especially by some groups of users, especially, you know, the jargon, the lingo of specific users can change significantly over 10 years. And even if it's a specific type of application, if it's a, I don't know, CAD/CAM application, you know, that language changes. And we've seen a situation that the application had to be completely reviewed and rewritten, retranslated, because the new generation of users, you know, appeared, you know, they fresh from the universities, and they just said, no, that's not the language that we use these days. You know, this is the old school, you know, this is the old way. And we got new terms, we got new language, and we want to see it in that application. So we just had to see, you know, how to adjust to the new language, the new requirements, because it's not gonna be the same, you know, our parents, you know, talk differently, you know, they just used, you know, different words. We use completely different words these days. So this changes faster and faster.
Yeah. And I think, you know, outside the more specific sort of application of language and machine translation, if you think about, you know, data generally within an organization, when it's captured, when it's originally generated in those source systems, it's for that operational purpose, right? So back to, you know, that point of Dom saying, you know, that over time that purpose changes. When that data, it could be a custom CRM system, it could be an online transaction booking system, or whatever it might be. But the point is it's there to support an operational, very functional purpose to begin with. That's the fire dog analogy there, I think, Dominic, isn't it? But what we're really talking about is, you know, what happens downstream is that purpose changes over time. So what was good enough in terms of data quality in order to be able to fulfill a transaction, an order, or whatever that might be, suddenly that's no longer good enough for the downstream processes. Like, you know, it could be artificial intelligence, it could just be simply operational reporting and forecasting. But the bar changes, it goes up and down depending on the different use case. So it's not just a case of saying, well, define data quality that's good enough for the organization. It's also what's good enough for the organization and then these particular use cases, and that can change and fluctuate. I think the key point there is measuring it. So, you know, for any given data set, you know where that bar is currently, and then you can make that decision. Is it good enough? Do I still need a fire dog? Or do I know, you know, just need a nice fluffy family
look, Dominic, William, I propose to leave dog analogy. It may be a little bit may divert us from discussing how we deal with bad data, because it may bring up certain ethical reasons. But speaking about not good enough, so I think it depends on what impact brings this bad data. So what's your, for your specific business, and again, at least what I know, not about the training. So for your specific business, what's the impact of the bad data?
Yeah, so from an MT machine translation point of background, you know, there's so many different factors that can, you know, we spoke about can affect the data. The impact of it means that when you're building a machine translation engine, you have to clean it. You know, you have to validate it, and often someone can give you the data, and you're not really aware of what quality is, and they might not be aware of what quality is because they don't necessarily know what you need what quality is for you as a machine translation engine. And you know, even if they've built machine translations in the past, like with SMT engines, it's quite logical, it's quite rule based. Neural engine is very different and has very different effects in terms of the level of any kind of nuances on the data, has much bigger impact. So you know those have a you know, an impact on the quality of the engine. You know, and yeah, so that really what we're saying here is that, you know, that after it comes into our system, the quality of the machine translation engine you build can be affected by the data. Depending on the purpose, let's say, for example, it's just for chat. When I say just for chat, chat's important, but, you know, chat is also something where we say just for chat because it has a lot of noise in it, and it has a lot of, let's say, slang, and let's say in other cases would be deemed as bad. But for a system that will need to do with chat, let's say for a service desk operation system, or for a chatbot, or for what it might be, the machine neural engine needs to be able to understand the actual use case for it. And then the impact of it, you know, isn't bad. But if you were to do that and you were doing medical documentation, the output of the machine translation then would be absolutely horrific. You know, where it says, you know, you're supposed to use X amount of let's say uranium or whatever it is that you might want to be using in a particular function, whatever it is, the engine will see, you know, give you the wrong part. So impact of bad data can be, you know, huge, you know, depending on it. You know, and if we just have one impact, for example, you know, I have a really good scenario that I was reading up about this because obviously, you know, this was coming up, and and I think it was the first mission that NASA did, actually, for the rover out to Mars, and you know, they were basically sending out this, you know, lots of scientific research, lots of equipment off to Mars, and this was going to orbit Mars. Now, one of the challenges was they had so much data that they needed lots of teams to put the stuff together. The data all got correlated, put together, and they sent this out into outer space. When it was in outer space, it crashed. And when they reviewed it, it was the fact that the team in the UK were using metric, and the other one were using a different measurement. And literally, that fact that they weren't using a single point of truth, or they weren't using a single standard, the impact was that everyone involved in that process, everyone who add things into the rover, anyone who was expecting any research from that, it was affected straight away. So that had like huge impact across everyone, not just for the person who had the bad data, but the person who actually had it in had that. So impact can depend on the reach of the data, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a valid point, and even in machine translation, it's always curious to observe how, when you translate from language with predominantly metric system to language predominantly imperial system, how it converts numbers. It's always very funny. William.
Yeah, so I suppose I deal with data and scenarios broader than machine translation generally. And I think working with our clients, in the best case scenario, if data is only being used in those source operational systems, in the best case scenario, bad data, the impact of that would be suboptimal organizational processes and teams spending an awful lot of time just trying to work around those data issues. So augmenting their processes with additional steps just to go around particular things. And it could be invalid or missing postal address to send a parcel to someone, for example. That's a best case scenario, is that it's going to cost time and that's money for an organization. But I think more commonly, bad data, the impact of that is a wrong decision being made. And that's either by a machine in what we're talking about here, or by a human. And I think those decisions could result in a loan being approved for the wrong person. It could be the wrong predicted action prescribed by a machine. That could be a translation, that could be something else. It could be, you know, a strategic decision that affects the performance and longevity of an organization and the security of its employees. I think in a worst case as well, would result in legislative breaches and enforcement actions from things like fines, etc., from the relevant authority in the different geographies. So there's the impact as you've described it there, but I think the broader impact to an organization, it can make or break some organizations, particularly small to medium-sized enterprises.
Mm-hmm. In your case,
it's everything depends, you know, on the audience and on the use case scenario here. You know, that's there's always that question, you know, when you, especially in e-commerce, when you got, you know, like a huge volumes of data, you know, and most cases you just get, you know, you got the shop, you know, that allows different sellers to sell, you know, millions of products. And have you ever been stopped by the wrong translation in your native language when you tried to buy something? Has it ever stopped you from buying? You know, that's so in this case, you know, you get bad data definitely somewhere. You get output which is not well corresponding to what you had in source, but it didn't stop you, you know. And the question is, was it good enough that you could understand it, you know, even if it was definitely faulty output? But it didn't. I guess it hasn't stopped anybody from, you know, just making a purchase on any of these sites, you know. So that's the case where you see it's about data, and what you got is just, you know, it's just a bad feeling, you know. It doesn't affect you in any way. That's one side, and on the other side of the spectrum, you got, you know, life and death scenarios that when something that was, you know, badly translated, when somebody just mixed, you know, lower than, you know, higher than, you know, more less, you know, these things, you know, which can be easily, you know, mistranslated by machine translation and not spotted. When you got, you know, that kind of bad data, then it's a matter of life and death sometimes. So it has to be, you know, we have to be careful, you know, and we have to use the right tools and use the right scenario, you know, depending on how we use that data. And I think I think the usage of the data or usage of the results of the data that we process, that defines further, you know, quality checks or even lack of them if you don't need them simply.
Mm-hmm. So basically it's relative, right? It confirmed my own observations, where we had even a case when people were buying things with batch translations, but when they decided to run an A/B test with copywriter improving translations, people started to buy less because they thought it's a promotion. It looks too good. So if we, you know, given that bad data is somewhat inevitable, even just because of this relativity, how much data can be bad, but still be at an acceptable level? Or maybe we need some of this bad data for some reason. So what's your take, Dominic? What's not bad, not too bad?
Well, yeah, I think what's the right word? Perfect data is like a unicorn. It's a mystical, magical creature that runs around in the woods and, you know, has magical powers. 100% clean data, from my opinion, doesn't actually exist, because the second it leaves one system and goes into another, there's a lapse in time, and you can't account for that. So that's often when, from machine translation purposes, that's something. So you have to have some variant of what's good enough, right? So you can't expect everything to be always 100% perfect. But at the same time, you know, what is good enough is strongly down to what you're actually going to use it for. So if, for example, it's a description or in a repair manual, let's say, for example, that's going to a service engineer inside an organization. So he needs to understand what it is he needs to do. So it needs to be readable, legible. Then good enough is readable. If it, for example, then is a button in a UI, and the button is, let's say, giving direction to someone who's an end user who buys that, then like Wojciech said, does it give them a bad feeling? Do they have trust in it? Do they believe it works? And if you are selling software and the software is obviously in a competition with other softwares, then you're obviously looking at making sure that the users believe and trust that the software will do what it does. And bad translation or bad there has a massive impact. So the level of quality needs to be a lot better than if you're training an engine for it. And then finally, if as we mentioned a little bit before with chat, what's good in one place, you can have a lot of noise in if you're building an engine for chat, because you expect to have a lot of noise. I would then also say that whatever you use that engine for, if we're talking about machine translation particularly, it's the reach of that. So are you using it for everything, everywhere? And then, what's the, is it good enough to do that? And what's the risk involved in allowing your engine to be interconnected like that? Maybe you need to look at building more than one engine. There's quite a hot debate about domain engines at the moment, whether you should just have one domain engine for everything or just several engines for different domains. Everyone has a different take on it with latest technology. As you've seen, that Facebook came out recently and saying that they can build one for everything. That's what I would say in terms of like, is data good enough? It depends on what it's being used for, and it depends on the end user that has to read it, and then it depends on the risk to the business. So it comes down to risk, really.
Okay. William, what about you? So, because you're not only about machine translation, right? So you might have different.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think my general opinion probably applies to machine translation. It's going to apply to a broader spectrum, and I agree that it's relative. I think we've all kind of established that. So I think to understand relativity of data quality, you've got to start by measuring that, and that's across multiple dimensions, things like completeness, accuracy, consistency, reliability, timeliness, etc. And for each of those dimensions, if we level, we measure and we agree the level that we'd want that quality to be at. It could be, I don't know, 80% complete, 90% accurate, 100% relevant in some cases, etc. Then the acceptance level is going to be unique to the organization, as we said, but also the individual use cases. So I agree there's those different scenarios. And, when is bad data okay? I think, if we were looking at a scenario where we wanted to understand, for example, user behavior of an application, perhaps in order to understand their behavior and how individuals are using an application or using a service, we want to retain those idiosyncrasies that exist within data, because we might learn something from them. I think on the other hand, if we look at a much more precise use case, something like a medical clinical trial, obviously lots of those going on at the moment in the world. And in that scenario, complete and accurate patient subject ontology, that's critical to understand the effects of that medicine on the clinical trial on different demographics. So in those scenarios, those levels you set would be much closer to 100%, but maybe not quite 100%. Again, those unicorns don't exist, but in those scenarios, you'd want at least 95% complete data, 95% accurate, 95% relevant, as in, it's timely, it's fresh. You wouldn't want to base those clinical trials on data that's 2 years old, for example, because the world changes. So those types of measures need to be agreed, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I really like when it comes to question, if bad data is acceptable and if it has any value. I really like the example that Microsoft said, I think was years ago. You probably remember when they started using machine translation for the knowledge-based pages. That was in some languages it was a lot of fun because of course these translations were quirky and they were funny, but they also changed the feedback question, because there was usually a question, you know, how did you like the page and blah, 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 the usual questions. But Microsoft changed the question to, were you able to solve your problem by using the machine translated version of the page? And that changes everything. You know, they had this data, they were able to see, okay, we got machine translation, which is not the best in some cases, but users are still able to solve their problems using their own knowledge-based article translated into their native language, and they can still sort of decipher what's going on, you know, what they should do, how they can solve problem on their own. And as far as I remember, Microsoft also correlated that data with the number of calls to the support centers, and they saw the huge drop. So you see, sometimes in some scenarios, you don't provide even the perfect language, the perfect native target language to the users. They will be able to decipher it, but it will be enough. And just back to for a second to that, you know, perfect data. You got 100% perfect data when you fabricate it. And this is the only scenario that, you know, and sometimes you need it. Sometimes you just need to fabricate the data, and just to see if your quality works. Or on the other hand, you want to fabricate 100% bad data and just to see, you know, what happens, because that's usually, you know, when I don't see errors, when I expect them, you know, when I don't see them at all, then, you know, I get suspicious, you know, that something is not working, you know. The regular expression is wrong, you know, the QA check is not working, you know, something didn't trigger the QA check. The zero errors is very suspicious.
It's a very good point, because, you know, we also, when we evaluate machine translation, if we see that a reviewer is too accepting, you know, it gives us some idea about that something goes wrong. That's true. I know, circling back to
for a second, Konstantin, maybe, you know, because that's a very interesting topic, you know, the subjectivity of the review on machine translation, because, you know, this is like, you know, it's you get 3 reviewers and you will get 3 different opinions on the same, and it's like, I know that you, sorry for, you know, just, you know, pulling some info from you as well, but, you know, I know that you also got some you know, nice ways to approach it.
Yeah, but, you know, we maybe we even write some article about that. We definitely coming up with a set of reviewer personalities, and I think they're more telling about how these people just what's their worldview overall, rather than just their professional skills.
Yeah, we've seen that as well. You know, there are some groups, you know, that they will complain about everything. You know, that we've seen these patterns, that there are, you know, like the MT reviewers who are expecting the quality to be perfect. Like, you know, they will just complain a lot when they see, you know, a couple of minor errors in the output. You know, they will already say, no, it's unusable. You know, it's just, you know, you can't use it because it's bad. And Dominic, you have similar, you know, experience.
So there's actually really quite interesting one. Provided the same machine translation to them in the beginning, and then several months later again, the score was different. Also then providing 2 different machine translations to them when comparing them, and both are perfectly acceptable, but one is said not to be. And this is a lot to do with what we call cognitive recognition. So if they're used to seeing a certain pattern, let's say in a human machine fuzzy match, for example, which is often close to a machine translation match, right? They're often looked upon as being similar. So if they're used to seeing a fuzzy match from a translation memory, they're able to look at this and go, okay, that's quite, we understand that because we know it's a human that's done it. When they see a machine translation, the cognitive ability, because the structure is often a little bit different, it feels a little bit different when you read it. This often means that the linguist first, the impact of that, I have to read this a little differently, is a, and that in itself is a change. It's not that it's bad, it's that it's different. and the level of expectation of what it is also different as well. So it's not necessarily bad. It's not bad data, but it's good data. But it's because it's being presented the first time. And if you present the same data several times, what you can find is that the one that was bad, after 4 or 5 times, they realize actually is perfectly fine, because they become accustomed to the pattern. Their cognitive ability has actually adapted and come assimilated into the new way. So this is why, when you roll out a new application, or you're doing it, you get a lot of kickback from new data management programs or new machine translation programs. You can't simply just do one test and expect it to work perfectly. You have to do several tests that allow the people that are running the tests, their brains to adapt, because we're not machines. Machines, the neural machines can adapt in seconds. Humans, yes, they provide better quality in terms of their ability, because they can actually think outside of the sentence that they received. But they can't do anything. They take time to recognize that pattern has changed, and then that's a big thing about cognitive ability. But yeah, it can be depending on the data that presented to them. So sometimes it's not bad. It's just what they have to get used to.
I think there is also another difference between machines and humans, that humans have sometimes legal liability, right? And we know those cases when, like in Canada, the government was sued for having bad translations for money, which brings us to the topic. So we discussed what makes data bad, but then who pays? Who pays to make it better, and who pays if it's too bad? So just to give a context, we have a very interesting team here, right? We have a consulting company. Let's say consulting company built a solution where machine translation is used, or an LSP working with this machine translation. So who pays for this, for bad data in this case? What do you think?
That's a good question.
I'm always going to blame Will, if I'm going to be honest with you. The higher up you go in the chain, the more responsibility you have, and the owner of it. So,
yeah, that's a good question, because that's usually that's the reality that what MT is supposed to help in lowering the translation cost. That's and speeding up the process. These are the main goals. And sometimes sometimes the cost aspects, the cost factor is got too much weight, and there's expectation that you will just get the translation for these proverbial peanuts. And especially when it's very dangerous when you don't know the quality of that specific engine for a specific language combination and on a specific content, especially when you run it for the first time. It's like I'm trying to I'm never promising anything. This is like we just need to run some content and see how it behaves, because otherwise we can run into serious trouble. So I think this is I think that everybody would pay here. The agency would pay for accepting a job like that, without checking, and for agreeing on some price for doing that job. And I think that consulting agency would also pay for providing something that that didn't deliver the quality.
Yeah, so also we do a lot of work to consume data in the same way, not necessarily for machine translation, but for various different purposes. And the way that we typically try and work in that scenario is we will analyze data quality to a point before we start to push that into algorithm developed models, that type of thing. If we find data quality issues, we then need to push those concerns back up the chain to the point of wherever we pulled that data from. And it goes kind of back to an earlier point I made, which is that the person responsible being the person that owns the systems or the processes where that data is originally captured and generated. So to quantify that a bit more, because it doesn't really mean much, I think the owner is the individual that you would go and speak to if a downstream data issue was found. Maybe that's through a gap of the process or whatever that might be. So it's the owner you speak to get that fixed. And I think if the quality of data that person's domain, in that person's domain, I think if it starts to degrade for whatever reason, it's those individuals that are going to be paying for it in the end. It's not the keepers and developers of downstream systems and processes that subscribe to that data, which is where I find a lot of data issues are being fixed. So it's fixing in flight. It's that famous 80-20 rule that I know that we've discussed as a group before, that's applied to data science. And I think that's completely unnecessary and completely avoidable. We wouldn't have to spend so much time fixing data, getting it into the right shape before passing it into our algorithms to build models, whether that's for machine translation or for anything else. If we can establish ownership and measure quality and fix those things as best we can at source, there's always going to be something, right? It's normally the shaping and combining of data, but that's not a quality issue. That's something else. Pure quality is going to, the buck stops with, in my opinion, the person that owns that system of where that data is being sourced from.
Well, I would tend to agree with a lot of what you said there. I was doing a bit of research for the webinar, and Gartner had some interesting facts on there, and this is just annually, and just in the States, okay. So it was $14.2 million annually, right? That companies in the US are paying just to fix bad data, right? That is a huge amount of money annually that people are spending to fix bad data, right? Because it has such an impact. So they're not only are they paying for it, they're losing out because of it. So for example, bad data has an effect that you may not see a trend in the market, and therefore you don't invest, and therefore you don't get the opportunities you need. From a machine translation point of view, if you supply it bad data and then it produces bad translations, then you cannot expect any different. So you have to trust your data, and the only way you do that, as you say, is take ownership of it, and really take ownership of it, and then start to really be aware of where are the touch points where this data could go bad. Don't simply just say, oh, it's this guy writes it. No, you have to think about all the touch points where data is being affected. And you have to be strong about it, and you have to enforce procedures and policies, in a company to ensure that data is right. But being aware, I think, is a big thing. You have to be aware of the impact of it, because often people aren't even aware that it's bad data is causing these problems, and they simply just go, oh, they're just a bad translation provider. That's just a bad machine translation engine. The assignment of blame or ownership of who pays for it, for example, can go further down the chain, because responsibility isn't been accepted higher up the chain. So I think the first thing in terms of who pays for it is you have the person at the top of the chain, which is obviously normally the enterprise. They need to take ownership of the data model. They need to take ownership of the data. And then everyone else down there can help them solve it. And in fact, I reckon if they did that, the cost of fixing it will be far less, because like you say, you're trying to fix it at source. So it doesn't have a chance to break out into other areas of the business. It doesn't have a chance to, be displayed in such a ways that could be misleading. Now, I was watching something recently, actually. Bad data is great, but it wasn't bad data. It was how the data was presented. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's still good data, but it had like a massive icon and a small icon. But it was the same measurement, and it was the people's perception of the data that was actually incorrect. The data, they actually read the measurements, it was fine, but the visualization of it was bad. And this kind of stuff, so owning the visual, how it's presented, owning how it's managed, and owning, I think is a real big thing, when it comes to this.
Totally. And we also had cases when enterprise explained that due to certain politics even, it's much better for them to pay for improving bad data than get clean data. So speaking of this, so it all ownership ends up at the data originator, and probably in either way this entity pays for that. But how do we improve the quality? So in our experience, we see that whereas we can one way we can just filter bad data. Then we may end up having not enough data in volume. So we can improve some of the data by modifying it. And then if there are still not enough, we can bring up some data from third-party source. So and sometimes it's very, it's lots of lines needs to be drawn of this on the sand, because you need to allocate that's something we just cannot improve, because if you said we can improve, you take part of this responsibility, right? And it's trickier. So what's your approach to improving quality of the data? Do you do that, or you just saying data owner that, look, it's your problem, please fix it? How do you improve the quality?
I've got one thing I would say first. Maybe it might be comical, but I'm going to say it. Stop using Excel, please. That's the first thing. Stop using Excel, okay? It's not meant for data management. If you think you have a data management process and you have to open on an Excel sheet, you don't have a data management process, okay? That's the first thing. Controversial as it is, stop using Excel for data management. That's the biggest thing you can change. Everyone can do that right today. If I ran a campaign today, I would say, everyone around the world, stop using Excel for data management. That's the first thing I would do.
That's not going to happen. We will have, we will have a base on Mars, and I'm pretty sure that they will be sending, this supply shipment list in Excel.
Yeah, do you know what happened? The Martians would see what we're doing and go, oh, Excel looks good. Can I have a go at using that? And you'd be like, no, stop doing that. But yeah, it's that would be the first thing. But for me, it's the Excel is great for like having the data in there, but it doesn't really it doesn't help with management, doesn't help with process, doesn't help with control, and that's all the things that affect the quality. And if you have to shuffle files around, then data maybe it's not a single record in a file. It's the file itself is you get versionitis. You have like 50 versions of the same file. You have all these kind of things that can affect if the data is good or not. I think there's some facts of data scientists are spending 60% of their time just organizing data. They're basically organizing Excel sheets. That's what they're doing. They're organizing Excel sheets. If they have a system that manages the content and is actually tracking it effectively, 60% of their time is now taken away from them, and they can start looking at things they're meant to do. And that is, where is it coming from? Where are the issues? Where are the things I need to fix in that data? And they can start taking ownership at a senior level. But they need to invest in technology and start to remove that human error areas. I would say is the biggest thing. We see a big influence in this at the moment, and AI is taking a big push on it, where they're looking at how you can improve your data management via AI. So looking at trends, how you're managing data, and it's similar with machine translation. Looking at the AI with neural, obviously, because it's adaptive, you can incrementally train it, right? So it gets better. But we're also looking at ways of using AI to categorize the content, to understand what domain it comes from, and start to look at how you can use that information to make sure that the quality is better. But for me, it has to be through automation, because data is too big. It's too big, it's too vast, it's a sea out there of data. And the volume of it that we're creating is growing exponentially, right? We're not building less data, we have more data. There's stuff on my phone, it's machine to machine, it's human to human, it's all different types of communication now that we haven't even started to consider. There's going to be new stuff where you're going to have communication between a product and a virtual reality device. More and more content in different ways. That's all being captured. So automation is the only way, and technology is the only way to solve it. Try to get humans out of the pace. That's my 10 cents on it.
Sure.
William?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you're right. Technology is definitely a way of getting out. I kind of described that walking from London to Brighton, which those not in the UK is a long old way. You could walk, you'd eventually get there, but taking a car is going to be that much easier and quicker. So what we were talking about there, that enterprise class tooling, AI driven tooling to help manage that data is going to be an awful lot quicker. And if that's if that's a car, then that Excel spreadsheet analogy, that would be more like a bicycle. It's a little bit quicker than walking, but you're still going to get tired. So I think that's that. But you're right, the data ocean is vast, and you can't boil it all. So what we typically advise, and why I typically advise, is to start in one particular area. So once we've established ownership, we've kind of all agreed on that. Within that one owner's domain, data quality can begin to be measured continuously. Understanding what those different thresholds are, and continuously measure that. Just measure it once and say this is the quality of data, but have that as a continuously measuring thing. And it'd be ideal if that was on a company scorecard alongside production system outages and that week's revenue. What is the quality of our data asset as the behind money, the most important asset an organization will have. So have that quality thing, that quality measure exposed right at the front, right at the top. And I think once measured, those thresholds are set, and action could be taken then to improve quality, and that requires some lightweight process. Definitely wouldn't at the very beginning when you start to embark on these things. I wouldn't start to suggest that you have some really heavy process. It needs to be quite lightweight, otherwise it's not going to be adopted, and people are going to see it as bureaucratic, as ways of just, I don't want to do this stuff, I just want to get on with my role, thank you very much. So avoid that, start with lightweight process. And the people involved in that process would then need to just understand what their roles are in improving quality, those different touch points that Dominic described through that chain, what their individual roles, but trying to keep it all contained within that one domain, and then to sustain that effort over time, to help try and what's the impact over time. If those data quality measures and those activities, they could be tied to particular business performance metrics, whether that's lowering costs, increasing profits, accurate forecasting, whatever it might be, legible translation, or anything else, or whatever is important to the company. If data quality is tied to those metrics and front and center on a scorecard, then as data quality improves over time, those business metrics will improve, and it helps to sustain that as an enterprise-wide initiative. And then once you've got that right for that domain, you can then start branching out to the next one, into the next one, and over time that footprint will grow. Data quality across the organization will grow, and then any other initiatives that require utilizing that data will just be that much, they'll just run that much smoother because you've got the foundation there.
Interesting. So, Wojciech, I think your position is a bit unique here because you have linguists, you have resources to improve quality of the data. So, how do you do that? What's your approach?
The approach is, first of all, we want to, I fully agree with William. You have to understand what's the quality. You have to measure it, and because we do a lot of quality assurance, some automated, semi-automated quality assurance on translations. This is how we can make sure that whatever we produce as translation, it's up to some specific standards, and we can, of course, it's gonna be our approach is we want to produce translations that then will be used to train engines, and these translations will be good. If they will be good, then if we use them for building MT engine, then we will get a good data coming out of this engine. We just constant, continuous measurement of anything that is translated. This is our approach to providing a good quality data. Because we've seen several times we've been put in a situation that we just had vast amounts of data, and we ran some checks, and we just discovered that there is inconsistencies in terminology, different style used across these translations. We've seen like hundreds of thousands of inconsistencies, and just improving that quality is just not possible. Sometimes you just have to say, okay, sorry, it's easier, to deal with the bad output from the MT because we can control it on the fly. We can just run these quality checks on the fly as the results appear. And sometimes it's easier, just to sort of provide better data from the current projects so at some point, MT Engine will start using the better data that we provided, you know, as the new content, and we'll just stop using the bad let's say the bad translation of the term, you know, the bad tone that is somewhere in the old bilingual data. We just want to provide as much of the good data as possible, so it will sort of prevail within the algorithm. Sometimes it's just, or we just decide, you know, just to cut off, you know, at some point we just okay, we see that that there is like a batch of old data that is completely inconsistent. We just can decide that, okay, we just cut it off completely. So it's sometimes it's better than just, you know, trying to fix it. But our approach is we try to fix it by just, you know, doing good job with the new translations.
You know, for machine translation engine building, we would say the same thing. You know, if you've got a load of data and you can't possibly kill it, you can automate as much as you can. Like you say, you try to get the good source in. At some point, then you just say, look, you know, you run out of time or you run out of budget, whatever it is, and you have to just start where you are. But then if you do have a good linguist or a good, you know, translator or a good supply chain, and you're checking the quality and reviewing it and making sure that when they are editing, they're doing the right job, that stuff comes back in, and then you can say, okay, let's, if we have it long enough, it's a big enough data set, then let's just build a new engine with the good stuff. Or like you say, if you can maybe upload the same quality of data, the good quality data several times to give it emphasis on the engine, then that will start to take precedence. But yeah, it's not a good position to be in, but it's one you get left in a lot of the time. I understand, Wojciech. It is what it is.
Yeah. So I think that sort of concludes our today discussion. So to summarize those points, basically we say that data itself is not bad. All data is born good, but there are some part of the process or stakeholder in the process can turn it bad. So if we identify this problematic part and fix it, then much like living organism, the data will regenerate and it will be good. And then, or maybe not unicorn good, but good enough, right? And every stakeholder, you know, stakeholders have to learn how to work together to ensure the data quality. But what's key is that even if we get bad data, then the fact of having this bad data can help us because we identify this problem, and we identify this problem, it's like a symptom, right? We identify the problem in this organism and we can fix it. So thank you, William, Dominick, Wojciech, for joining me today, this fun discussion. Thank you everyone who went online, listened in, and feel free to reach out to any of us through LinkedIn or email. Our contact details, I'm sure, will be provided in the email sent after the panel by Argus. And yeah, have a nice day. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Cheers then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.